As the clock struck midnight on New Year's Eve, I handed my mother-in-law a crisp, white envelope. It wasn't a card, but a reckoning, her eviction notice. The cheap plastic party horns blared around us as the final seconds of the year ticked away on the television. 10, 9, 8. My husband Mark's arm was wrapped tight around my waist, his friends cheering, their champagne glasses clinking. In the center of it all was my mother-in-law, Brenda, holding court from my favorite armchair, wearing a tacky light-up reindeer sweater and a smug little smile. 7, 6, 5. She caught my eye and gave me a condescending little wink, as if to say, "Look at me, dear. I'm the queen of this castle." 4, 3, 2. Mark leaned in to kiss me, his lips warm and familiar. "Happy New Year, babe," he whispered against my ear. 1! The room exploded. "Happy New Year!" As everyone hugged and cheered, I pulled away from Mark, a calm I hadn't felt in months settling over me. I walked over to the side table where a single, crisp, white envelope sat waiting. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a simple piece of paper should. I navigated through the crowd, my path clear, my destination singular. Brenda was basking in the attention, accepting a refill of champagne from one of Mark's friends. "Oh, thank you, sweetie," she cooed. "It's just so wonderful to spend this time with my family." I stopped directly in front of her. The party chatter seemed to fade into a low hum. "Brenda," I said, my voice steady and clear. She looked up, her smile faltering slightly at the look on my face. "Yes, dear? Did you need something?" I held out the envelope. Her eyes darted to it, then back to my face, a flicker of confusion in them. A New Year's card? For me? How thoughtful. She reached for it, but I didn't let go just yet. I made sure she was looking right at me, right into my eyes, so she would understand that this was not a gift. This was a reckoning. "Happy New Year, Mel, your gift, an eviction notice," I said, finally releasing the envelope into her hand. The silence that fell over our living room was absolute. It was like a vacuum had sucked all the air and joy out of the space. The countdown on the TV was replaced by some bubbly pop music, which sounded grotesque and out of place in the sudden tension. Brenda just stared at the envelope, her fingers frozen around it. Mark rushed to my side. "What is this? What's going on?" he whispered, his eyes wide with shock. He hadn't known. I'd made sure of that. This was between me and her. Brenda slowly, deliberately tore open the seal. Her eyes scanned the legal document inside, her face paling with every word she read. The smugness was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She looked up at me, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "You wouldn't dare!" Oh, but I would. I had. It's funny how a person can be pushed and pushed and pushed until they find themselves backed against a wall they didn't even know was there. And when that happens, they either crumble or they push back with the force of a battering ram. My journey to this New Year's Eve began 6 months ago with a phone call and a tragedy. Mark's father had passed away suddenly from a heart attack, and Brenda was left alone in a house that was too big, with a mortgage she couldn't afford. It was the only humane thing to do. "Of course she can stay with us," I'd told Mark, holding him as he grieved. "We have the guest suite downstairs. She can stay as long as she needs." As long as she needs. The words echoed in my mind now, mocking my past naivety. The first month was fine. She was grieving, quiet, and seemed genuinely grateful. She'd cook dinner occasionally or fold a load of laundry. I thought we were building a new kind of family. But then, the grief began to fade, and the real Brenda began to emerge. It started with small things. A comment about how I loaded the dishwasher inefficiently, moving my spice rack from alphabetical order to her own chaotic system because it was better. She'd accidentally shrink my favorite sweaters in the wash, offering a saccharine-sweet apology that didn't sound apologetic at all. She called them suggestions. I called them invasions. She was testing the waters, seeing how far she could push. Mark, bless his heart, was oblivious. "She's just lonely, honey," he'd say. "She's trying to feel useful. Just cut her some slack." So I did. I cut her slack until there was none left to give. The suggestions became critiques. My cooking was too spicy. My decorating was too modern. The way I worked from home wasn't a real job. She started treating our home not as a place she was a guest in, but as her own domain, and I was merely the incompetent maid. She would invite her friends over for bridge club without asking me, leaving me to clean up their wine stains and pastry crumbs. She would go into our master bedroom when we weren't home. I knew because my jewelry would be slightly out of place, or a book on my nightstand would be bookmarked on a different page. It was a slow, creeping violation of every boundary I tried to set. I talked to Mark, and he'd promised to talk to her. He would, and for a few days, she'd be on her best behavior, all sweetness and light. Then the cycle would begin again, each time a little worse than the last. She was a master manipulator, playing the grieving widow card whenever she was confronted, making Mark feel guilty for even questioning her. I felt like I was losing my mind, and worse, losing my own home. The final straw didn't just break the camel's back, it atomized it. It happened 3 days before New Year's. I was working on a huge presentation for a potential client, the biggest project of my career. I'd been up for 2 nights straight, fueled by coffee and sheer terror. I saved the final version on my desktop and went to take a quick shower before the big video conference. When I came back, my laptop screen was black. It wouldn't turn on. Panic seized me. I called our IT guy, a friend of ours, who came over immediately. After an hour of diagnostics, he gave me the grim news. The motherboard was fried, completely shot. "It looks like liquid damage," he said, pointing to a sticky residue near the fan vent. "Someone must have spilled something on it." My blood ran cold. On the corner of my desk was a coaster, and on that coaster was the faint sticky ring of a teacup, Brenda's favorite flowery teacup. I confronted her in the living room, my voice shaking with rage. "Did you spill tea on my laptop, Brenda?" She didn't even flinch. She just looked up from her romance novel and said, "Oh, that old thing." "I was just tidying up your desk, dear. It's such a mess. I might have nudged a cup. You really should be more careful with your things." The casual, dismissive way she said it sent me over the edge. This wasn't an accident. This was sabotage. But even that wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was what I found later that day. While trying to recover my files from the cloud, I used Mark's computer. His email was open, and there it was. An email chain between Brenda and Tiffany, Mark's high school ex-girlfriend. Brenda had been orchestrating a reunion. "He's not happy, Tiffany," one of her emails read. "She works all the time and doesn't appreciate him. He still talks about you. We just need to find the right time for you to accidentally run into him." It all clicked into place. The sabotage of my work, the constant undermining of our marriage, it was all part of her grand plan to break us up and replace me with a woman she'd chosen for her son. Back in the living room, the New Year's party was dead. All our friends stood awkwardly, not knowing where to look. Brenda's face contorted into a mask of theatrical victimhood. Tears welled in her eyes as she turned to her son, the eviction notice trembling in her hand. "Mark," she sobbed, her voice cracking pitifully, "your wife is throwing your poor, widowed mother out onto the street on New Year's Day after everything I've been through. How can you let her do this to me?" All eyes went to Mark. He looked from his crying mother to me, his face an unreadable mask. The fate of my marriage, my home, my sanity, all hung on his next words. And then he opened his mouth to speak. Mark looked at me, his face a storm of confusion and hurt. "Sarah, what is this? An eviction notice? Are you out of your mind?" His voice was a harsh whisper, but it carried across the silent room. He turned to our friends who were frozen in place like statues. I think the party's over, guys. We're so sorry." One of his friends, Dave, nodded quickly and started ushering the bewildered guests towards the door, their half-hearted Happy New Year's dying on their lips. The front door clicked shut, leaving the three of us in the wreckage of the celebration. The silence was deafening, broken only by Brenda's theatrical sobs. "Mark, honey," she hiccuped, clutching his arm. "She's trying to drive a wedge between us. She's always been jealous of our relationship." Mark pulled his arm away, not aggressively, but with a weary finality. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for an explanation that made sense. "Talk to me, Sarah. What's going on? Why would you do this? And why like this? In front of everyone?" I took a deep breath, my newfound calm holding steady. Because I wanted her to have nowhere to hide. I wanted her to know that the games were over. I looked directly at Brenda, whose tears miraculously seemed to slow. "I know you fried my laptop, Brenda, and I know why." Brenda scoffed, dabbing at her dry eyes with the back of her hand. "That's a ridiculous accusation. It was an accident, I told you. You're just being hysterical." "Was it also an accident that you've been emailing Tiffany?" I asked. The name hung in the air between us. Mark's head snapped towards me. "Tiffany? My ex-girlfriend Tiffany? What does she have to do with anything?" Brenda's face went white. She had the look of a cornered animal. I was just seeing how she was. We were always friendly. It's not a crime to keep in touch with old friends. "It is," I said, my voice dropping low. "When you're trying to set her up with my husband, when you're telling her he's unhappy and that I'm a terrible wife, when you're actively plotting to destroy our marriage." Mark looked back and forth between us, his face a canvas of disbelief. "Mom, is that true?" "Of course not, my sweet boy," she wailed, the waterworks starting up again with renewed vigor. "She's making it all up. She's twisting things. She's trying to poison you against your own mother." I just stood there, letting her spin her web of lies. I knew it sounded insane. I knew I sounded like the jealous, paranoid wife. But I had the truth on my side. "You're right, Mark," I said calmly. "You shouldn't just take my word for it." I walked over to the hallway that led to our home office where his computer was. "Come with me." Mark followed, a sense of dread rolling off him in waves. Brenda scurried behind us, still protesting. "This is an invasion of my privacy. You have no right." "You used his computer, Brenda," I said without looking back, "and you forgot to log out of your email." I sat down in the office chair and clicked the mouse. The screen flickered to life, displaying his desktop. And there, in the corner, was the open browser window with her email account. The most recent chain was right at the top. The subject line, "An update on M." I clicked on it and turned the monitor towards Mark. He leaned in, his hands braced on the desk, and began to read. I watched his face as he scrolled. I saw the confusion melt into dawning horror, then into a deep, profound hurt. He read the words his own mother had written, words that called me cold and career-obsessed, words that reminisced about how happy he had been with Tiffany, words that laid out a plan to have Tiffany run into him at his favorite coffee shop next week. He scrolled all the way to the bottom of the email Brenda had sent just yesterday. "Don't worry, dear," it read. "I think I finally figured out a way to get her out of the picture for good. Just be patient." Mark straightened up slowly, as if he were aging a decade with every inch. He didn't look at me. He turned around and faced his mother, who had gone completely still in the doorway. The fake tears were gone. Her face was a hard, cold mask. "Mom," he said, his voice hollow and broken, "you did this? You wrote all this?" Brenda's chin lifted in defiance. Her victimhood had evaporated, replaced by a chilling self-righteousness. "I did what I had to do for my son. She's not right for you, Mark. She never has been. I was just trying to help you see that." The admission, so blatant and unapologetic, seemed to suck the last bit of air from the room. Mark just stared at her, speechless. He looked utterly betrayed. He had defended her, made excuses for her, asked me to be patient with her, and all along, she had been systematically trying to dismantle his life. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw everything I needed to see: understanding, apology, and a shared sense of devastation. He opened his mouth, and I knew he was about to side with me to finally, unequivocally, choose our marriage. The 30-day notice I had given her suddenly seemed far too generous. He took a step towards her, his expression hardening. "Get your things," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I want you out tonight." Brenda's eyes widened. This was not how her plan was supposed to go. She had lost control. The fury on her face was quickly replaced by wide-eyed panic. She took a staggering step back, her hand flying to her chest. My heart," she gasped, her voice suddenly weak and raspy. Her eyes rolled back in her head. "I can't breathe." And then, with a choked sob, she crumpled to the floor in a heap. For a split second, both Mark and I froze. My first uncharitable thought was, she's faking it. It was just too perfect, too theatrical. Another masterful performance from the queen of manipulation. But then I saw the bluish tinge around her lips and the genuine panic in her eyes before they rolled back. Mark unfroze first. "Mom!" he yelled, rushing to her side and dropping to his knees. "Mom, can you hear me? Sarah, call 911. The command jolted me into action. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed. The calm I had felt all evening had shattered, replaced by a frantic, adrenaline-fueled fear. While I relayed our address and the situation to the dispatcher, Mark was checking her pulse, his face pale with terror. "She's breathing, but it's shallow," he said, his voice strained. The dispatcher told me to make sure she was on her back and that her airway was clear. I knelt on the other side of Brenda, helping Mark gently adjust her position. Seeing her so vulnerable on my office floor, her tacky reindeer sweater blinking erratically, a wave of guilt washed over me. Had I caused this? Had I pushed her too far? The next 10 minutes were a blur of sirens, flashing red and blue lights painting the walls of our living room, and the calm, efficient movements of the paramedics. They swarmed our home, asking questions I couldn't fully process, hooking Brenda up to monitors that beeped with an unnerving rhythm. They said her blood pressure had spiked dangerously high and she was showing signs of a transient ischemic attack, a mini-stroke. They needed to get her to the hospital immediately. Mark insisted on riding in the ambulance with her. As they wheeled her out on the gurney, her eyes were open but unfocused. She didn't look at me. Mark paused at the door, his hand on the frame. "Sarah, we'll talk when I get back." He looked completely lost, torn between the woman he had just discovered was a saboteur and the mother who was now fighting for her health. Then he was gone, the ambulance doors slamming shut, its siren wailing as it disappeared down our quiet suburban street. I was left standing alone in the silent house. The remnants of the party, confetti, half-empty champagne flutes, a discarded party horn, seemed like artifacts from a different lifetime. I sank onto the sofa, my body trembling with the aftermath of the adrenaline. The eviction notice lay on the floor near the armchair where she'd been sitting, a stark white rectangle that felt like a murder weapon. I spent the next few hours in a haze, mechanically cleaning up the party debris, trying to erase the evidence of the night's disaster. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped into my throat. Mark sent a few terse updates. They were running tests. She was stable. She was conscious now. He didn't mention the emails. He didn't mention the eviction. It was like a curtain had fallen on that part of the evening, and now we were in a completely different play. Around 4 a.m., he finally came home. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped, his eyes red-rimmed. He dropped his keys on the counter and came to sit beside me on the sofa. We sat in silence for a long time, the space between us charged with everything that had been said and done. "She's going to be okay," he finally said, his voice rough. "They're keeping her for observation for a couple of days. They think the stress of tonight triggered it." I nodded, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry," felt wrong. "I told you so," felt cruel. So I just waited. "I read the rest of them, Sarah," he continued, staring at his hands. "All the emails. I scrolled back months. The things she said. The lies she told you, the lies she told me, the way she talked about you." He trailed off, shaking his head in disbelief. "I'm so sorry. I was blind. I didn't want to see it, and I let her hurt you. I let her do this to us." He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were full of a pain that mirrored my own. "Can you forgive me?" I reached out and took his hand. It was cold. "There's nothing to forgive, Mark. She's your mother. You wanted to believe the best of her. But you're my wife," he said fiercely. "You're my life. I should have protected you. From now on, that changes. I promise." We made a plan. Brenda couldn't come back here. That was non-negotiable. Mark said he would find her a place, a small apartment, or an assisted living facility nearby, and he would handle all of it. He would make it clear that her actions had consequences and that she had broken his trust completely. It felt like a breakthrough, like we had weathered the storm and come out the other side, bruised but united. The next 2 days were tense. Mark spent most of his time at the hospital or on the phone with real estate agents. I stayed home, trying to work, trying to reclaim the sense of peace that had been stolen from me. When Mark came home on the second night, he looked different. He wasn't just tired, he was strained, defeated. "I spoke to her doctor," he said, avoiding my eyes. He sat down with both of us. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. "And?" "The TIA was a warning shot," Mark said, pacing the living room. "Her blood pressure is still dangerously high. They've put her on a lot of medication. The doctor said, he said she can't live alone. Not right now. She's a fall risk, she's confused sometimes, and she needs someone to monitor her medication and her diet. He said any major stress, like moving into a new, unfamiliar place by herself, could trigger a full-blown stroke." He stopped pacing and stood in front of me, his expression tortured. I knew what was coming before he even said it. The doctor's words were the perfect weapon, a get-out-of-jail-free card handed to Brenda on a silver platter. Mark took a deep breath. "She needs a full-time caregiver, Sarah. The doctor was very clear." My blood ran cold. "So you'll hire someone," I said, my voice flat. "A nurse. There are agencies for that." "I can't afford that," he said, his voice cracking. "Not a good one, not 24/7, not with her medical bills piling up. We'd be wiped out in months." He wrung his hands, finally looking at me, his eyes pleading. He said the best environment for her recovery is a calm, familiar place, with family. The room started to feel very small, the walls closing in. I could see the trap closing around us, a trap laid not with malice, but with medical charts and a doctor's professional recommendation. "No, Mark," I whispered, shaking my head. "Absolutely not." "Just for a little while," he begged, his voice breaking. "Just until she's stronger." "What else can I do, Sarah? She's my mother. I can't just throw her into a cheap nursing home to die." His words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. And then he delivered the final blow, the one thing he knew I couldn't fight. "She asked for you, Sarah. She told the doctor that the stress was all her fault, that she'd been a terrible mother-in-law, and that all she wants to do is come home and apologize to you. She wants to make things right." My first instinct was to laugh. It was so utterly absurd, so perfectly Brenda. Apologize? Make things right? She wasn't capable of genuine remorse. This was just her next move on the chessboard, a checkmate disguised as a white flag. She was using her health, a doctor's recommendation, and Mark's guilt as her pawns, backing me into a corner where saying no would make me the monster. I looked at Mark's desperate face, saw the conflict warring in his eyes, and I knew I couldn't put him through the agony of choosing between his wife's sanity and his mother's life. I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. If she wanted to play a new game, fine. But this time, I was setting the rules. "Okay," I said. The single word made Mark's shoulders sag with relief. "She can come back." He rushed forward to hug me, but I held up a hand, stopping him. "On one condition. Several, actually, and they are not negotiable." A flicker of apprehension crossed his face, but he nodded. Anything. The next day, I went to work. I had my friend, the IT guy, recover every byte of data from my fried hard drive. I printed out the entire email chain between Brenda and Tiffany. I called a lawyer who specialized in elder care and contracts, and I visited a local home security store. When Mark brought Brenda home from the hospital 2 days later, I was ready. He helped her into the house, a frail and diminished figure leaning heavily on a walker. She looked smaller, her face pale, the smugness replaced by a convincing mask of contrition. "Sarah," she said, her voice a weak rasp, "can you ever forgive me? I was so wrong, I don't know what came over me." She tried to take my hand, but I stepped back. "We'll talk in a minute, Brenda," I said, my voice polite but firm. I led them into the living room. On the coffee table, I had laid out a series of documents in a neat stack. I gestured for Brenda to sit in her favorite armchair. Mark stood nervously by the fireplace. "As we discussed, Brenda, you'll be staying here while you recover," I began, my tone all business. "But things are going to be different now. This is my house, and while you are a guest here, you will live by my rules. Mark and I are in complete agreement on this." I picked up the first document. This is a post-nuptial agreement. It states that in the event of a divorce, Mark retains full ownership of this house, which was his before we married. However, it also includes a new clause. If the divorce is a result of familial interference, specifically any actions by you that undermine our marriage, I will be entitled to 75% of the value of the home and all shared assets. Mark has already signed it. Mark nodded grimly. Brenda's eyes widened, her frail act faltering for a second. Next, I picked up a thicker document. This is a formal rental and caregiver agreement. It outlines that you will pay a nominal monthly rent of $1 to establish tenancy, which can be legally terminated with notice. It also details your responsibilities as a resident. No uninvited guests, no entering our private bedroom, no altering or damaging our property. It specifies my role as a household manager, not a caregiver. It states that I will not be responsible for administering your medication, preparing special meals, or assisting with your personal care. We've hired a visiting nurse who will come twice a day for that. A nurse, a young, no-nonsense woman named Maria, chose that moment to walk in the front door, which I'd left ajar. She smiled professionally. "Good morning. I'm here for Mrs. Henderson's 10 a.m. medication and vitals check." Brenda looked stunned. Maria was already unpacking her blood pressure cuff. I continued, picking up the printed emails. "This is a copy of your correspondence with Tiffany. The original is in a safe deposit box. If there is ever another instance of you attempting to sabotage my marriage or my career, this will be sent not only to Tiffany's husband, who I believe is a partner at a major law firm, but also to every member of your little bridge club. We can call it the Brenda Newsletter." Her face went from pale to ashen. The final piece of my presentation was a small dome-shaped camera I placed on the table. "Finally, for your own safety and our peace of mind, we've installed a new security system. There are cameras in all the common areas of the house, the living room, the kitchen, the hallways. Everything is recorded." I looked her dead in the eye. All pretense of frailty was gone. She was staring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I had stripped her of all her weapons, her ability to manipulate Mark, to isolate me, to play the victim, to operate in the shadows. I had created a prison of accountability for her right in the middle of my living room. "So, welcome home, Brenda," I said with a thin, cool smile. "These are the terms of your stay. You can accept them, or Mark can drive you to the assisted living facility he has on standby. The choice is yours." She looked at Mark, expecting him to intervene, to save her. He just stood there, his arms crossed, his expression resolute. He met her gaze and gave a single sharp shake of his head. He had made his choice, and he wasn't wavering. A long, tense silence filled the room. Maria finished taking Brenda's blood pressure and cheerfully announced it was a little high but manageable. Brenda's jaw was tight, her knuckles white where she gripped the arms of her walker. Finally defeated, she gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. She knew she had lost. The war was over. The last 6 months have been quiet. Brenda keeps to her suite. She is civil, but cold. Maria comes and goes. The cameras watch over the house like silent sentinels. The light has returned to Mark's eyes, and the tension that had coiled in my own shoulders has finally gone. It's not a perfect fairy tale ending. She's still here. But I walk through my home now, and it feels like mine again. Every now and then, I see her glance up at the camera in the corner of the living room, and a flicker of her old defiance crosses her face. But it's just a flicker. She knows she is being watched. She knows the rules. And she knows that I am no longer a pawn in her game. I'm the one who owns the board.